Before we start, hit that subscribe to support Battleground Archive, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Captain Robert Hendricks, and for 47 years I've carried a burden that has consumed every quiet moment of my existence, like a cancer eating through my sanity. I served in the United States Navy for 26 years, commanding nuclear submarines in the deepest and most classified waters on Earth. And I have commendations locked in a vault that will never see daylight. But when I think about what my crew and I discovered during Operation Deep Current in 1987, none of those achievements matter anymore. You need to understand something immediately. I am not some conspiracy theorist spinning tales for attention. I am not one of those people who sees hidden agendas in every government decision. I am a methodical man from Nebraska who believed in duty, honor, and the chain of command above all else. I followed orders without question, kept secrets that could topple governments, and maintained operational security when lives depended on silence. But sitting here in my study in Colorado with emphysema slowly stealing my breath, probably giving me 8 months at most, I've decided some truths are too dangerous to take to the grave. When we returned from that mission 36 years ago, they sequestered us in a facility that doesn't appear on any official maps. These weren't standard military debriefings. These were psychological restructuring sessions designed to make one thing absolutely clear. If you speak about what you witnessed, the consequences extend far beyond your own life. Your spouse disappears, your children have accidents, your grandchildren never make it to their first birthday. They never explicitly threaten your family, but they describe scenarios with such clinical precision that you understand exactly what compliance means. For decades afterward, I experienced nightmares that would wake me screaming. I would find myself drenched in cold sweat with my wife Margaret shaking me awake, asking what demons haunted my sleep. I could never explain to her that the ocean she thought was empty actually teemed with intelligence so alien and ancient that human minds weren't equipped to process its existence. How do you tell someone you love that everything they believe about life on Earth is fundamentally incomplete? I lost 4 members of my crew in the first decade after we surfaced. Lieutenant Commander Harrison supposedly suffered a heart attack at 42. Sonar technician Rodriguez died when his car inexplicably veered off a mountain road during perfect weather conditions. Chief Petty Officer Williams was found dead in his locked apartment with no signs of struggle or forced entry. Torpedo Man Chen simply vanished during a fishing trip, leaving behind a boat with the engine still running and his wallet undisturbed. Coincidence? Perhaps. But when you've signed documents that make federal law look like parking tickets, you learn to recognize patterns that official investigations never acknowledge. So why am I breaking my silence now? The answer is brutally simple. The emphysema is going to kill me before they have the opportunity. Margaret passed away 4 years ago from complications during routine surgery that somehow went catastrophically wrong. My children are adults with their own families scattered across different continents. And honestly, after carrying this weight for nearly 4 decades, I would rather die knowing I attempted to warn humanity about what's coming than pass away as another silent guardian of secrets that could determine our species' survival. What I am about to reveal isn't science fiction or the product of deep-sea hallucinations. This is what I witnessed with my own eyes, 36,000 feet, beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean in a location that officially doesn't exist. This is why governments spend trillions developing space programs while systematically underfunding oceanic research. This is why less than 5% of our own planet's oceans have been thoroughly explored despite decades of technological advancement. It was September 1987. I was commanding the USS Leviathan, a modified Los Angeles-class attack submarine equipped with experimental deep-sea capabilities that remain classified to this day. At 53, I had overseen more classified operations than most admirals see in their entire careers. I thought this assignment would be my final tour before retirement, a chance to test new technologies in relatively peaceful waters. Then, on a Tuesday morning that changed everything, I received orders that came directly from the Pentagon through channels I'd never encountered before. I was summoned to Admiral Morrison's office at Pearl Harbor, where 3 individuals in unmarked uniforms stood behind his desk like sentinels guarding forbidden knowledge. No name tags, no insignia, no branch identifiers, just crisp uniforms and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of my appearance and behavior. Admiral Morrison dispensed with pleasantries immediately. "Captain Hendricks, you have been selected for an operation of critical importance to national security and global stability. You have exactly 60 seconds to accept or decline this assignment. If you decline, this conversation never occurred and you will be transferred to administrative duties for the remainder of your service. If you accept, your understanding of reality will be permanently altered. What is your decision?" 60 seconds. Not enough time to ask about mission parameters, crew safety, or operational objectives. Not enough time to consider the implications for my family or my career. Just enough time to decide whether I trusted the system I had served faithfully for 23 years. "I accept, sir." The words left my mouth before my rational mind could process their significance. Admiral Morrison nodded to one of the unmarked officers, who opened a briefcase containing documents that would reshape my understanding of human civilization. "You deploy in 72 hours. Destination coordinates are classified until departure. Mission objectives will be briefed during transit. Your crew has been selected from personnel with specific psychological profiles and minimal family complications. You cannot discuss this assignment with anyone, including your wife, under any circumstances. If questioned about your whereabouts, you are conducting routine deep-sea equipment testing. Is this understood?" The next 72 hours passed in a surreal haze of preparation and deception. I had to lie to Margaret for the first time in our marriage, telling her I was participating in standard naval exercises that would keep me away for several weeks. She smiled and kissed me goodbye, completely unaware that the husband who returned would be fundamentally different from the man who departed. The crew assembled at a restricted dock facility that I had never seen despite years stationed at Pearl Harbor. 18 men, all experienced submariners, all with security clearances that exceeded standard requirements. There was Lieutenant Commander Stevens, a navigation specialist who could plot courses through underwater terrain that existed on no civilian charts. Chief Sonar Technician Martinez, whose ability to interpret acoustic signatures bordered on supernatural. Engineering Officer Thompson, who understood reactor systems modified with technology that seemed decades ahead of anything I had encountered. Each man had been selected not just for technical competence, but for psychological resilience and what the briefing documents described as paradigm flexibility. We were handed equipment that defied immediate categorization. Personal devices resembling oversized wristwatches that monitored vital signs, stress levels, and what the technical specifications called neural activity patterns. If these readings indicated psychological breakdown or security compromise, automated protocols would be implemented to protect both the mission and our families. The threat was presented as standard operational procedure, but the underlying message was unmistakable. The submarine itself was unlike anything in the standard fleet. The USS Leviathan had been modified with hull materials that absorbed sonar rather than reflecting it, making us virtually invisible to conventional detection methods. The propulsion system operated on principles that our chief engineer admitted he didn't fully understand, providing thrust without the mechanical noise signature that characterized normal submarines. Most disturbing were the viewport modifications, reinforced with transparent materials that could withstand pressures that should have crushed any known substance. The briefing occurred in a sealed compartment deep within the submarine, accessed through multiple security checkpoints that scanned biometrics I didn't know the Navy possessed. The officer who introduced himself only as Director Walsh projected a single image onto the bulkhead that made my blood run cold. It was a sonar reading from depths that shouldn't have been accessible to human technology, showing massive geometric structures arranged in patterns that defied natural formation. "Gentlemen," he said with the clinical detachment of someone who had delivered this briefing before, "you are being deployed to investigate anomalous readings detected at coordinates 36,000 feet below sea level. What you will encounter has no conventional explanation within current scientific understanding. Some of you will question your training. Others will question your faith. All of you will question your sanity. But one absolute remains constant. When you return to the surface, if you return, Nothing you have witnessed can ever be discussed with anyone lacking your security clearance. He clicked to the next image, showing what appeared to be a three-dimensional map of underwater terrain that looked more like architectural blueprints than ocean floor topography. Your mission is observation and documentation only. You will not attempt communication. You will not attempt recovery of any materials. You will maintain minimum safe distance from all anomalous contacts. Should your psychological evaluations indicate compromise, you will be sedated and confined until mission completion. Are there any questions? The silence in that compartment was absolute. 18 experienced submariners, men who had faced Soviet attack submarines and underwater emergencies that would terrify most people, sat in stunned quiet as we processed implications we couldn't yet fully comprehend. Finally, Lieutenant Commander Stevens raised his hand tentatively. "Sir, what exactly are we expecting to find down there?" Director Walsh's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes that suggested he was remembering his own first encounter with whatever waited in the abyss. "That, Commander Stevens, is precisely what we need you to determine. What I can tell you is that initial contact occurred in 1962 during deep-sea weapons testing. Since then, we have documented 17 separate incidents involving military and civilian vessels encountering phenomena that challenge our understanding of life on Earth. Your mission is to gather intelligence that will help us decide how humanity should respond to neighbors we never knew existed." The descent began 18 hours after departure from Pearl Harbor, taking us through ocean depths I had never imagined possible. Standard submarines operate effectively to perhaps 1,000 feet below surface. Military attack submarines might reach 2,000 feet under emergency conditions. But the USS Leviathan continued descending past 5,000, past 10,000, past depths where water pressure should have compressed our hull into scrap metal. Chief Martinez monitored sonar readings that became increasingly bizarre as we descended. At 15,000 feet, he reported contacts that moved in formations suggesting intelligence, but displayed acoustic signatures unlike any known marine life. At 20,000 feet, the sonar began detecting structures that appeared artificial, but were constructed from materials that absorbed and redirected sound waves in ways that defied physics as we understood it. By 25,000 feet, the external cameras were picking up bioluminescent displays that formed patterns too complex and coordinated to represent random biological activity. Streams of light moved through the water in geometric configurations that resembled communication networks or transportation systems. Engineering Officer Thompson reported that our own electrical systems were being scanned by energy sources originating from unknown locations, as if something was analyzing our technology while we attempted to analyze theirs. The psychological pressure began affecting the crew around 30,000 feet. Men who had served through combat situations without breaking started experiencing anxiety attacks and disorientation that our medical officer couldn't attribute to standard deep-sea psychological stressors. The personal monitoring devices we wore began recording neural activity patterns that the automated systems flagged as anomalous, triggering alerts that suggested our minds were being influenced by external factors. I remember standing in the control room at 32,000 feet, watching depth gauges display numbers that shouldn't have been survivable, when Chief Martinez called out contact readings that changed everything we thought we understood about intelligent life. "Sir, I'm detecting multiple large contacts approaching from bearing 270. Size estimates indicate objects approximately 200 feet in length, moving at speeds exceeding anything in our technological capability. They're not trying to avoid detection. If anything, they seem to be announcing their presence." Through the reinforced viewports, we began seeing lights approaching through the absolute darkness of the deep ocean. Not the random flashing of deep-sea creatures, but coordinated illumination that moved with purpose and intelligence. As these lights drew closer, we could make out shapes that defied immediate categorization. Streamlined forms that might have been vessels or might have been living creatures, gliding through water with grace that made our most advanced submarines look clumsy and primitive. The first direct visual contact occurred at 34,000 feet, when one of these entities approached close enough for our cameras to capture detailed imagery. What we recorded that day remains locked in classified files that most government officials don't know exist. The entity was approximately 150 feet long, with a hull or skin that seemed to shift between metallic and organic properties. It moved without any visible propulsion system, maintaining perfect stability in currents that should have made controlled movement impossible. But what disturbed us most profoundly wasn't the technology or the impossible biology. It was the unmistakable sense that we were being observed, studied, evaluated by intelligence that regarded us the way marine biologists might examine specimens in an aquarium. These entities weren't hiding from us or avoiding contact. They were deliberately presenting themselves for our inspection, while simultaneously conducting their own analysis of human capabilities and intentions. The communication attempt began when we reached 36,000 feet and encountered what could only be described as a city. Structures rose from the ocean floor in configurations that suggested advanced engineering principles applied by minds that understood physics differently than human scientists. Architecture that seemed to grow organically while maintaining geometric precision that human mathematics could barely describe. Materials that absorbed light rather than reflecting it created surfaces that seemed to bend space around themselves. Towers spiraled upward in helical patterns that hurt to observe directly, as if our visual cortex wasn't designed to process such complex geometries. Bridges connected structures without visible supports, spanning distances that should have collapsed under the immense water pressure. Yet they remained perfectly stable in ways that challenged everything we understood about engineering. The city extended in all directions beyond the range of our most powerful external lights. We estimated it covered an area larger than Manhattan, with vertical structures reaching heights that disappeared into the darkness above us. Population centers that had existed when human ancestors were barely capable of using simple tools. Civilization that had thrived in the abyss for millions of years while life on the surface struggled through evolutionary development. Lieutenant Commander Stevens attempted to map the city's layout using our navigation systems, but the readings made no sense. Structures appeared to shift position between scans, not moving exactly, but existing in slightly different configurations each time we observed them. Space itself seemed malleable down there, responding to principles we couldn't comprehend. Our instruments detected gravitational anomalies that suggested these beings had learned to manipulate fundamental forces in ways that made our nuclear technology look primitive. The inhabitants appeared gradually, emerging from openings that materialized in solid walls as we watched. Beings roughly humanoid in overall structure, but elongated and refined in ways that suggested evolution in an environment without the constraints of surface gravity. They moved through water as easily as humans move through air, their movements flowing and graceful in ways that seemed almost choreographed. Their skin possessed a luminescent quality that created patterns of communication visible across vast distances. What struck me most profoundly was their obvious intelligence. These weren't primitive creatures reacting on instinct. They observed us with curiosity rather than fear, approaching our submarine in coordinated groups that suggested complex social organization. Some carried devices that might have been tools or instruments, scanning our hull with technologies that made our sensors seem crude by comparison. Others positioned themselves in formations that indicated they were documenting our presence for analysis by unseen observers. The first direct communication attempt occurred when one of the beings, larger and more luminescent than the others, approached our main viewport and made deliberate gestures toward what appeared to be a communication device. The device projected symbols onto our hull, geometric patterns that shifted and evolved as if testing our capacity for pattern recognition. Chief Martinez reported that these symbols were being transmitted on multiple frequencies simultaneously, suggesting communication methods that utilized both light and sound in ways we had never encountered. Dr. Reeves, our mission psychologist, observed the interaction with growing excitement despite protocols that demanded clinical detachment. "Captain, these gestures aren't random. They're following mathematical progressions that suggest these beings understand advanced concepts like prime numbers and geometric sequences. They're trying to establish baseline communication using universal mathematical principles that any technological civilization would recognize." The psychological impact on my crew intensified as we spent hours observing this underwater civilization. Men trained for combat situations and extreme stress began experiencing what our medical officer could only describe as cognitive expansion beyond normal human parameters. Several crew members reported sudden understanding of concepts they had never studied, as if proximity to these beings was somehow enhancing human mental capacity in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Chief Martinez began interpreting sonar readings with accuracy that seemed almost supernatural, understanding acoustic signatures and underwater terrain with intuitive knowledge that exceeded his training. Engineering Officer Thompson started making modifications to our systems based on insights he claimed were coming to him spontaneously. Improvements that increased our operational efficiency in ways our design specifications said were impossible. The beings seemed to recognize these changes in my crew, observing us with what I can only describe as approval or satisfaction. They began approaching closer, displaying more complex communication patterns, sharing technological demonstrations that revealed capabilities beyond our comprehension. We watched them manipulate water currents with gesture-based controls, creating transportation systems that moved materials and individuals across vast distances without visible mechanical assistance. One demonstration involved what appeared to be matter conversion, transforming raw oceanic minerals into complex structures through processes that looked like controlled molecular assembly. They created tools and architectural elements in real time, reshaping physical reality through technologies that made our most advanced manufacturing seem primitive. The implications were staggering. These beings possessed capabilities that could revolutionize human civilization or render it completely obsolete. The turning point came when the largest being, who seemed to serve as their representative or leader, approached our submarine directly and initiated what could only be described as a formal diplomatic contact. It positioned itself precisely in front of our main viewport and began a communication sequence that combined light patterns, sonic frequencies, and what our instruments detected as directed electromagnetic pulses affecting our electronic systems in controlled ways. Dr. Reeves worked frantically to decode the communication patterns while I faced the most significant command decision of my career. These beings were clearly attempting peaceful contact with representatives of surface civilization. They were sharing knowledge, demonstrating capabilities, and showing respect for our presence in their domain. But our mission parameters explicitly forbade any attempt at communication or interaction beyond passive observation. The communication device the being held began projecting more complex symbols, mathematical concepts that progressed from basic arithmetic to advanced physics principles our human scientists were only beginning to understand. The being was teaching us, sharing fundamental knowledge about reality that could advance human understanding by centuries. But every instinct trained into me by decades of military service demanded strict adherence to mission protocols that prohibited any response. Chief Martinez reported that the beings were transmitting on frequencies that seemed designed specifically for human auditory processing, suggesting they had studied our biology and communication methods extensively. They knew we were there, understood we were intelligent, and were making deliberate attempts to establish meaningful contact with surface dwellers who had finally developed technology capable of reaching their domain. The moral weight of the situation became unbearable as I realized we were potentially witnessing the most significant moment in human history, first contact with an advanced civilization that had coexisted with humanity for millennia. These beings could answer questions about life, consciousness, technology, and existence itself that had puzzled human philosophers and scientists since the beginning of recorded history. They were offering knowledge freely, without apparent desire for conquest or exploitation. But my orders remained absolute. Observe and document only. No communication, no interaction, no deviation from mission parameters regardless of circumstances encountered. The contradiction between human curiosity and military discipline created psychological tension that affected my judgment in ways I had never experienced during previous operations. The beings seemed to recognize our internal conflict, displaying what appeared to be patience and understanding. They continued their communication attempts without showing frustration or aggression, maintaining peaceful postures that suggested they were willing to wait for us to overcome whatever constraints prevented meaningful interaction. Their behavior indicated sophisticated understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. As hours passed, more beings emerged from the city to observe our submarine. Hundreds of them arranged themselves in formations that might have been ceremonial or simply practical for group observation. They displayed individual variations in size, luminescence patterns, and apparent technological specializations that suggested a complex society with diverse roles and capabilities. Some appeared to be scientists or researchers, carrying instruments and making detailed observations of our technology. Others might have been artists or philosophers, creating light patterns that seemed designed for aesthetic appreciation rather than practical communication. The city itself began responding to our presence in ways that suggested collective intelligence beyond individual consciousness. Structures modified their configurations to provide better observation points. Lighting systems adjusted to illuminate specific areas for our cameras. Transportation networks redirected traffic to minimize interference with our documentation activities. The entire civilization was accommodating our visit with hospitality that transcended species barriers. Dr. Reeves became increasingly agitated as he processed the implications of what we were witnessing. "Captain, we're observing proof of advanced intelligence that has existed on Earth far longer than human civilization. These beings possess technologies that could solve every major problem facing humanity. Energy production, environmental restoration, space travel, medical advancement. They're offering us knowledge that could transform our species. We have to find a way to communicate despite our restrictions." The weight of command had never felt heavier as I struggled between duty and conscience, between following orders that protected national security and pursuing opportunities that could benefit all humanity. The beings waited patiently, continuing their attempts at peaceful contact while we documented evidence that would remain classified indefinitely, hidden from the very species that could benefit most from this extraordinary encounter. "My name is Captain Robert Hendricks, and I have 47 days left before this emphysema takes what remains of my voice. In those 47 days, I've told you about Operation Deep Current, about the city 36,000 feet beneath the Pacific, about beings who offered humanity knowledge that could revolutionize our existence. I've broken oaths that could have cost me everything when I still had everything to lose. The truth is out there now, documented and recorded despite decades of enforced silence. Those beings are still down there, still waiting with patience that spans geological time periods, still hoping that someday humanity will develop the wisdom to accept what they've always been willing to share. They're not invaders or threats. They're neighbors we never knew existed, teachers offering lessons we're too frightened to learn. I'll die knowing I tried to give our species the choice that was stolen from my generation. Whether humanity embraces that knowledge or continues hiding from uncomfortable truths will be decided by people braver than the men who classified first contact and buried it in vaults that officially don't exist. The ocean covers 71% of our planet's surface, and we've explored less than 5% of it. Now you know why. Some secrets are too big for governments to handle, too transformative for institutions built on controlling information rather than sharing it. But secrets this profound belong to humanity, not to the few who appointed themselves guardians of truth, too dangerous for public consumption.